I'd like to take a moment to say a huge thank you to our sponsors for the How to Thrive podcast, Flank. Flank is your in-house legal team's first AI colleague. Flank introduces AI native agents who are designed to integrate seamlessly into your existing systems, empowering legal teams like yours to work smarter. They instantly resolve commercial team requests, eliminate bottlenecks, and enable your legal team to operate at the speed the business needs. But this is just the beginning. At Flank, they firmly believe that the future isn't simply about better software. It's about building towards a future where fully autonomous AI colleagues will own entire workflows end to end, deeply embedded into your tools and systems. This is the new generation agentic engine that's redefining what's possible for in-house legal. If you'd like to find out more about Flank, have a look at getflank.ai. And if you get in touch with them, please do mention How to Thrive, so that they know that it came from one of our wonderful listeners.
We talk about sustainability all the time. We talk about, environmental sustainability. We talk about, how we get rid of our rubbish, all of that kind of thing. But what about the sustainability of the people?
Hello, Helen. Happy International Women's Day.
Oh, yes, thank you. Happy International Women's Day to you too.
How are you faring?
Yes, good. Busy week this week. Back from Abu Dhabi. I was in Abu Dhabi last week for meetings, back and fully into the throes of a really lovely busy week, doing all things being human, visiting different practices, and we've got a day together on Friday, planning world domination and all the rest of the things. So,
yes.
It's really, really exciting, and obviously it's Pancake Day tomorrow as well. So, I mean, what could be better?
Oh, it doesn't get any better. Pancakes and strategy J for being human. It's a strong week, and International Women's Day. So Helen, International Women's Day, what does it mean to you?
Oh, do you know what? I find it really interesting because I was pondering this just now before we started recording, and I find it a bit difficult to articulate what it means to me. It's really, I guess I've maybe not considered it as much as I should have. But I guess it's a chance for us to really celebrate, the historical advancements of women, and just all of the things that I hope that we can transfer from one generation to the next and pass down to our daughters that are really, really important, and that kind of sense of empowerment. And really, I guess the message that when you look back over history, nothing's impossible, right? Nothing is impossible. And that's not exclusive to women, of course, but I think it's such an amazing thing to consider, how far women have come and their role in centuries gone by to compare to what we can do now, and all of those sorts of things. So
it's a great opportunity to connect in this amazing sort of international connection between women of across the world as well, which I think is quite special. I was always still am. I don't know where I sit on it. I struggle a little bit. Like, I've always struggled with things that kind of hold women out separately, like women's only events and women's only clubs and things. Someone once explained it to me. Like, he was talking he was talking about the psychology of discrimination, and I found it absolutely fascinating, and a lot resonated. And he was essentially saying that everybody discriminates. That's what humans do, but they discriminate in things that are more familiar to them.
Mm-hmm.
So the way to really encourage diversity within professional and personal lives is to be exposed more to the things which are less familiar to us. So, for example, it might be less familiar to people to see women on boards. And so as humans, we will then discriminate against women being on board simply because it's less prevalent, because we're not used to seeing that. Our human brain is saying, well, that's unusual. So actually the way that we need to combat that is by making a real song and dance and making people aware of when women are on board, so that our brains stop thinking that that's unusual. And that, I don't know if I've articulated in any way, shape or form as well as the person did who was speaking about it, but that really resonated with me. It really kind of sat with me. But yeah, it's a fantastic day. And And I think what I hope is that a lot of what we're about to hear will be listened not only by women, but also by men as well, because I think it's a really important topic that we're going to talk about. And we've got a phenomenal guest, Amy, who is one of your networks and one you've worked with for quite a while now.
Yeah.
You'll be in a much better position to introduce Helen than I will.
Oh, she's a friend, a colleague. She's somebody who has been in the veterinary profession for a great many years. She's been a veterinary nurse for over 25 years. She has been in a veterinary leadership position, which for 18 years. And that on its own, as a veterinary nurse, a woman in the veterinary space, is really impressive. But a little bit like me, we both share a love of knowledge and learning, and she's doing a master's at the moment in organisational development. I think that's correct. But she's focused her thesis on something that, as soon as she started to explain it to me, I thought this ties in so beautifully with everything we talk about. When we're talking about human factors, we're often talking about making it easier to do the right thing, making it easier to succeed, and putting barriers into to make errors happen, prevent errors happening. Sorry. And when I started to talk about this to Amy, it just felt like something we should have been doing forever. Actually, there are points in a women's cycle every month that we're not our best selves. We are ultra human. Whether that's being vulnerable, whether that's being in pain, whether that's just being downright grumpy. It doesn't matter how it affects you. Equally, there's good days of the month too. But why don't we map it? Why don't we figure it out? Why don't we work to our advantage? Know the days where we're going to find things super easy, and on the days that we're not going to be our best selves, appreciate that, take a step back and ask what we need. So Amy's going to talk a bit around that and about her research, which is just fascinating.
It really reminds me as well, and I know we refer to this a lot, but what Rob Archer was saying about the plateau line, the flat line of performance versus this curve. And I think we just need to take time and pause and reflect that flatlining is not possible for anybody, but also let's embrace kind of actually the real opportunities that come from a women's cycle, because we'll explore in this episode, that at some aspects you might be more creative, you might be more nurturing, you might be, and yes, at other points you might just be overwhelmed with hormones and emotion. But a really awesome conversation that I am so glad we are having this International Women's Day, and something that affects a huge number of the population. But not only is our hope that this is empowering for women and women take something away from it, I hope that men will listen and will feel empowered as well, because I don't think it's a conversation that men should be left out of.
Definitely.
So I'd like to say to everybody, happy International Women's Day, and enjoy the episode. As always, Helen and I are back at the end, sharing our thoughts and views. But it was a brilliant episode to record, and I hope you enjoy it as much as we did.
Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to this week's How to Thrive. It's a special International Women's Day version. So happy International Women's Day, Helen. How are you?
I'm very well. Happy International Women's Day. Couldn't even say it there for a minute. I'm very excited.
Very exciting. And I'm super excited because we're joined by Amy Martin. Amy, welcome.
Hello, both of you. It's nice to be here.
So Amy is one of those, so basically Helen and I had been having these conversations, and I think this whole episode should probably come with a bit of a caveat that we are going to be very open. We're going to talk a lot about female health and biology. So if you're not up for that today, then maybe come back and listen tomorrow. But the reason why I was so excited to talk to Amy is that Helen and I had been having these conversations recently. And I had been on the contraceptive pill for years and years and years and years and years. And I came off it and I began to realise that once a month I was a complete and utter nightmare. I would cry quite openly at any stage of the day. I'd be really angry. I basically got nothing done for an entire day. And it took me about 4 months to realise that it was essentially happening in the same stage of my cycle. And I said to Helen, Oh my goodness me, this is so disruptive. And I'd never really noticed it before. I think because sort of my cycles had always been so regulated because I'd been on the pill. And I said to Helen, this is a nightmare. And if this is happening to me, this must be happening to women all over. Wouldn't it be great if we could find some way of understanding our cycles and understanding what that would mean for our working and our performance? And Helen said, funny you should say that. I've just been talking to Amy, and Amy is doing a master's all about this. And so I am super excited because I think this is going to be really empowering. And it's so often the case with How to Thrive. I feel like it's very self-indulgent because I'm going to learn a lot. But Amy, it is an absolute pleasure to have you here. And yeah, for this very special edition of How to Thrive. But before we get into any of that, we always ask our guests to paint a bit of a picture for us and explain kind of how they've got to where they are now. So Amy, over to you. What's brought you here
Yes.
today?
Thank you, Claire, for that exciting introduction. I hope I can live up to that.
Yeah, no pressure.
So I'm a registered veterinary nurse, like Helen, and I'm also an accidental leader. So what that means is that certainly in our profession, you get really, really good at being a veterinary nurse, and then they go, here you go, have a head nurse badge. And so without really realizing that it's a completely different skill set, you get this badge and off you go and you're leading people. And so I didn't do that on purpose. It was just because I was in the right place at the right time. And I was really awful at it to begin with. And so I realized that I needed to do CPD in leadership. And so I guess I've spent the latter part of my career. So I've been in veterinary now for 25 years, and I've spent the latter part of my career collecting qualifications in leadership because I felt that I needed to upskill. And actually, the more I learn, the more I realise it's just about being there in the moment with the other person that you're leading or the group of people that you're leading. So I am a fully qualified coach and mentor as well. And I've got an interest in team welfare really because of the type of work that we do is really emotionally laden. And I think we need to pay attention to that, and we need to help people to process through that to thrive, to use the terminology from your podcast.
Well, there's already so much in that I'm resonating with. I'll let you into a secret. It's not just the veterinary profession where you get promoted into a leadership profession without any of the skills you need. I think we find it all the time in law. It's like, well done, you're a brilliant technical lawyer. Now go and lead some people. Yeah, so that's a lot. So veterinary nurse, and now you find yourself doing a master's in. Well, remind me what your master's is in.
It's in people and organisation development.
Wow, fascinating.
And that's a funny story. I might tell you a little bit about what organisation development is, because when I started my master's, I didn't know, which is odd, isn't it?
Love that.
So I started in the workplace developing Schwartz rounds into the veterinary profession. And if you haven't heard of Schwartz rounds, go look them up. They're basically a reflective space for healthcare professionals to come together to talk about the emotional and social impact of the work that they do. And that came from the NHS in healthcare. And colleagues that I worked with through that setting were like, I think you might like organisation development. Why don't you explore that? So typical me, like to be a high achiever, like to kind of crack on and do. I just thought I would just do a master's. I'll just do a master's without even realising what organisation development was. It's a behaviour science for teams and groups. So you learn how to facilitate conversations, how to facilitate interventions, which plays into what I was doing with Schwartz rounds. But the way that it's done is it's change management, but through the people. Because so often, right, we go, well, here's our organisation chart. What we're going to do is tomorrow we're going to have this organisation chart or this operating model. But we're not going to tell anybody. We're just going to expect them to do it. Here's the policy. You just need to read the policy. But what this does is organisation development practitioners talk to the people that are going to be involved in that change, and then they start to develop interventions, maybe leadership programs, that kind of thing, for the people that are going to undergo that change, because you can't make people change, right? They decide they're going to change because it has to be motivated from within. So you basically help people to talk through the difficulties or, the things that they need to pay attention to before they can undergo a change in an organisation. So that's a little bit of background on the masters.
So Schwartz rounds are something that I'm actually really glad that you framed it, that it's in the healthcare and particularly in the kind of the clinical setting, because I have to admit I've heard a few people in the veterinary profession, and especially at How to Thrive Vet as well, talk about Schwartz rounds, and I've sat there going, I don't know what a Schwartz round is. Should I know? Should I know? And so I should have asked the question before now, but I haven't. So thank you for that, because yeah, I didn't fully understand. And I think it's actually incredibly brave and exciting to jump 2 feet in with something you don't entirely understand, because then you're going to learn. At least you don't come back away with any preconceptions. So that's good. So through that, you're now studying or you're writing your dissertation. And tell us what you're writing your dissertation on.
So it's kind of, I guess I've arrived at menstruality, which is what you were talking about before, tracking your menstrual cycle and kind of harnessing the power of that, I suppose, through my own personal dances, shall we call them? Wrestles with burnout. So I've burnt out 3 times in my career. The first time I developed post-viral chronic fatigue syndrome. The second time, full-on mental health breakdown. And the third time, an episode of stress-related thyroiditis. And one of the things that being an organisation development practitioner teaches you is that actually you are your tool. And that I am the tool of the trade. If I can't show up to work, then I can't do my job. And that's true for veterinary nurses, true for lawyers, right? It's true for all of us, that, we are our most valuable tool. And so I thought, I can't keep doing this. This is not something that is going to be conducive to me continuing in this line of work. And I started to think about, okay, well, we talk about sustainability all the time. We talk about, environmental sustainability. We talk about, how we get rid of our rubbish, all of that kind of thing. But what about the sustainability of the people? It's really, really important in an organisation that we can keep going, right? But what I see so often is that we have to be continually productive all the time, and then we burn out, but never mind, we'll just get some more people. And that doesn't feel very human. I'm just going to let that rest for a second, Like, we're all human beings, and do we need to be consistently on? And I think the modern world has kind of stolen from us that off duty, because we've got our phones, we're always constantly busy. And I realised also that as a woman, I don't think I have given myself permission to rest at all, ever. I'm always in a state of doing and never in a state of being. And so to be better at my job, but also a better mum, a better wife, a better daughter, a better friend, I needed to find a way of giving myself permission to rest. And so there were 2 things that happened simultaneously. I came across so Gianni Hugo Wurlitzer and Alexandra Pope's work about the menstrual cycle and how we track the menstrual cycle and that sort of ebb and flow. And they describe it in terms of the seasons. So the spring, summer, autumn, winter seasons, winter being when you are on your period, and the premenstruum being autumn. And so you mentioned, Claire, about that difficult time. For me, that tends to be the premenstruum. And for years, obviously, I grew up with the 90s narrative, that it's fine. If you've got body form, you can carry on and skydive. So I just, I thought that I had to ignore my period, that I had to ignore the cyclical nature of my body, because I'm in a man's world, right? And men have a diurnal cycle, a 24-hour cycle, and women tend to have this monthly cycle. But, the patriarchy has set us up for, if we want to get on, we have to be like the men, right? And so, yeah, the body form advert for me was a real kind of moment in social history where I think, well, that's what we were being taught as young girls, that you just carry on. If you look at how the body form adverts have changed, I think that's really interesting about where we're moving towards in social history. And that's obviously just an aside for you there.
I'm totally going to go away, by the way, and look that up. And I remember the advert you're talking about. So whether
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
conscious or subconscious. Yeah, love that.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and so no, it's fine. It's fine. Please interject because I can go off on one about this. So if I'm getting boring, please just let me know.
No.
And so that happened, and I started to think about my own monthly cycle and the ebb and flow of that. And simultaneously, I was reading a book called Wintering by Catherine May, where she talks about how we have winters in our lives. We might have an episode of burnout, we might have grief, we might have a chronic illness, we might have something else going on for us that makes us winter. And rather than fight against the winter, the plants and animals don't fight against the winter. They embrace it and they prepare for it and they plan and they go into winter. And it can be quite a nourishing time, actually. Things are happening under the surface. We can reflect and renew, and then we can come out again in spring and, be bubbly and effervescent and extroverted. Another facet to my personality is that I'm an introvert. So now I've learned to love that autumn winter moment of my cycle. I'm like, yes, this is me. This is what I love. And I've also learned how I need, I can do different work in those different parts of my cycle. Catherine Bay, I think the book really resonated with me because it taught me to embrace that and prioritize that, and not to go, oh, it's so annoying, I'm in winter and I can't do the things I want to do. I was fighting against myself all the time. I don't know if that's the experience that you have.
Yeah, it's like fighting against the tools you have, right? Like goes back to exactly what you were saying at the start, which are we are our tools. And so
Yeah.
if you aren't maximizing, it's like trying to shoehorn yourself to do something which you're not in the state to do is not efficient in any, in any
Yeah.
stretch. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and I recognise that it's quite a privileged position to be able to say, oh, I choose the work that I do in the different parts of my cycle. And there are some times when you can't do that. I imagine, Claire, that a court date's a court date and you can't turn around and say, sorry, I'm in autumn, I can't possibly show up.
Do you know what? Right? I would love that.
And also,
maybe one day.
That's not what I'm saying. There is a lot of work that's gone into this already, where particularly Alexandra Pope has come up with a period policy. So, let's pay attention to the cycle in women. Let's look at that from a corporate perspective. Do women need a day off for their period every month? And I don't think it's found its way into organisations, funnily enough. And I think the reason for that is because every woman's cycle is different. Every woman will need a different thing. And, remembering as well that it's not just women that menstruate. There are other uterus owners out there too. And if you don't have a uterus, somebody who does have a uterus. So you are impacted by this all the time. So we do need to pay attention to it. But we're not saying, oh, women just need days off. We might need to do different work. We might need to do reflective work rather than work that requires kind of standing on a stage and presenting. But what I've discovered is that if you do need to attend court, for example, or present or stand on a stage for whatever reason, and you know that you're going to be in autumn, the power that comes from knowing your menstrual cycle means that you can plan and prepare for that. And so what I do is I make sure that, instead of spending my time over preparing, I might use the time I've got to go to sleep more, to practice mindfulness or yoga or something that really nourishes me so that I can show up as my best self, even if I am in autumn. And, knowing that if I have to work, for example, in a busy veterinary nursing job, that it might be when I come home, I need to put my feet up and, really think about how I can nourish myself in those moments.
I mean, yeah. And I think it's the power for me. It's like the power of understanding because, I'll be frank, I thought I just didn't get on. I thought I was going to say I was going mad, which sounds flippant, but I was like, what is going on? What do I need to go to the doctor and get an increase on my medication? Why am I absolutely losing the plot? What it was such an extreme, unrecognized reaction in me that I genuinely thought something really, quite serious was going on with my mental health. And now that now I kind of can almost mark it in my diary and give myself a break. It's like give myself permission on that day to take a breath, to go easy on myself. Or even if I haven't recognized what day it is, just to kind of, it spurred that thought of like, well, actually, maybe what day is it? Oh, maybe I'll just take a breath and give myself a break and talk nicely to myself rather than kind of beating myself up about it. Yeah.
I think if I can just chip in, my experience has been that, I would have this day of the month which would come around where I would have some sort of catastrophic meltdown. The chicken licking, the sky was falling in, everything was wrong, and my poor husband would probably end up with really sore ears from listening to me rant about something, and then a few days later thinking, oh, thank God, it was only PMT. But never really managing that or actually joining the dots until I spoke to you, Amy, and thought, oh my God, why, I specialize in human factors, in making it easy to do the right thing, finding the fit between people in the environment they work with and all this. And I'd never once thought, surely I must be able to plan this. Do your studies look at like the best way to track stuff? What would be your advice on that?
So, like I said earlier, all change starts with you, right? You're the only person that has control over the change. And so I've started with me. So I've done a big autoethnographic piece of work around my own menstrual cycle. And because I used to say to people, I only have one good week out of the month because I really do suffer with premenstrual syndrome. And I spend kind of 1 week of the month kind of damaging all of my relationships. And then the week after my period, I spend repairing everything that I've damaged, the week before. And I didn't realize that other people had that experience. And I think because it wasn't not particularly physical pain or heavy bleeding or anything like that, I didn't seek medical advice for it because I thought, oh, it's probably just normal. The narrative that, oh, it's just, it's PMT or PMS or she must be on her period or, they only took hysteria out of the DSM in 1980. And they used to think that women's uteruses crawled around inside them, which is what created the hysteria. And so it's really difficult when you're trying to be a professional person. You almost want to, because we're trying to fit into a man's world, we want to move away from that narrative that women are hysterical, irritable, funny around their period. But actually it's true for many of us, right? And the more people I've talked to about it, they're like, yeah, me too. And yet we're ignoring it in the workplace. And so I've done a study on myself because I thought, well, I need to understand it. And then once I understand me, I start reaching out then. And I think, well, is this true for you too? I find it in the premenstruum, I find it very difficult to take any feedback. I feel highly criticised. I feel like people are attacking me. I feel if I have to have a difficult conversation, that takes so much more energy in the premenstruum than it might take in the sort of summer part of my cycle, the ovulation. I really struggle to kind of be compassionate, I think. I'm irritable, I lose my temper quicker. And so if I can put off having a difficult conversation or if I can put off receiving feedback, then maybe that would be a good thing to do because then I'm not putting myself under that undue pressure. And so having co-inquired about this with a colleague, we now check in with where we are in our cycle, autumn, spring, summer, winter, where are you in your cycle? And it's kind of given us that kind of quick check-in of autumn, code, treat me kindly because I might be a bit fragile. Yeah. So we're kind of using that seasonality to check in. And then I thought, what I'm doing here is I'm designing through a feminist lens. Okay. And when we design organisations through a feminist lens, it tends to be kinder for everybody and more compassionate for everybody. And it's quite an inclusive way of looking at organisations. But what about the men? Let's not alienate them. Let's not kind of say, oh, it's all about women and our menstrual cycles and we need to plan organisations around this. So what I started to do is I started to use the seasonal metaphor with other people, and I started to say, does this feel resonant for you? Because I've realised that most people understand the metaphor of the seasons. You know, that the autumn winter is the slowdown and the spring summer is the kind of wind up again, and the sort of, so there's, you know, it fits into the sort of extroverted introverted cycle. You have your circadian rhythm. You might be a night owl, you might be a lark. So there's lots of different cycles that we can pay attention to in our lives. And what I've realised is that by sharing the cycle that I've chosen to live by, to kind of think about how I plan for rest and renewal, I can encourage other people to think about what cycle they might want to live by. So, you know, rather than this constant productive always on, don't we all deserve a bit of rest? And actually, how can we find the permission for that? So I've sort of spread the net quite wide. And I hope that it's helping people.
I think that's really, really interesting and really resonates, actually, because we talked to, on our previous podcast, we talked to a man called Dr. Rob Archer, and he does work around high performance routines. And he talks about this kind of in a lot of the industries which a lot of us kind of look up to, whether it's professional sports and things like Formula One and football and athletics and all these kind of sports, they prioritize the rest period, as you know, the winter as much as they do the spring and the summer. And it's about, like, rather than in professional services where we tend to try and flatline and just perform at our best all the time, maybe we need to give ourselves, you know, we need to recognize the benefits, and taking that one step further and saying, actually, what does that look like within your own kind of biological makeup? Like, how does that work? I think is really important, because again, it's not just saying, like, this is the model that should work for everybody. It's like, what actually works for you.
And then thinking about what you said, Claire, about the professional athletes, actually, there is quite a lot of research now about professional female athletes really looking at how their menstrual cycles play into, for example, achieving a personal best, you know, and that it's harder to achieve a personal best potentially in autumn, winter, unless, as you quite rightly pointed out, they're controlling their cycle in some way with, you know, a contraceptive hormone or that kind of thing. There's lots of things at play there as well. But, you know, I think sport really have got it right, because they pay attention to the body, and in professional services we don't pay attention to the body. But why not? Because it's our best instrument.
And that's so interesting. And actually, as I was thinking that, I was like, what is the real difference? Because is the reason why sport, they invest so much in the body, is because it is immediate returns? Is it because you see who crosses the line first? You know, it's very physical, and it's who crosses the line first, whereas you can't see the functioning of the brain. So, and it's a lot more nuanced. So I guess the tool that we're all using is our brain, rather than necessarily our physical, our whole physical. Now, obviously, it's all intertwined, but it's less of a win or lose situation. It's less, you know, it's less black and white. It's much more nuanced than that. And so maybe we forget about that. I was also going to ask you, actually, that I think sometimes you might look at autumn and winter and think you're a burden, and that actually, what are you contributing in those times, you know? But listening kind of deeper to what you're saying is that it's not really about, you know, it's forgetting about this feeling that you're only contributing if you are, you know, you're typing, or if you're actually kind of producing content. There are other ways of contributing, and so it's not a weakness when you're in autumn and winter. It's just a different way of performing. Is that a fair summary? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we don't think that rest can be productive, but it massively is productive. And what I've noticed is that when I stop and I rest, and I've been practicing yoga nidra as a way to stop myself from being, like, from doing all the time, and just move into a state of being. And my creativity and my problem solving bubbles up. So my ability to write in autumn, winter is phenomenal. I can't sit still in summer. I want to be doing things and busy. And so I try and plan my writing time for autumn, winter. And I just want to pay attention to one of the other words that you used there, Claire: burden. I think that's really interesting. And again, as a woman, I think I definitely feel like a burden. I feel like I have to be caring for everybody else. If I'm not caring for everybody else, then I'm not doing my job, quote unquote, as a woman. But where did we get that narrative from as well? Why does it have to be us that care all the time, that are, busy cleaning the house, looking after the kids, that kind of thing? Our men want to do it. They want to do it as well, but the world is not really set up to enable them to do it. School phones me first. There's no changing table in the men's toilets. All of those things that, society could do better to enable more equality between the two roles. But I think for years and years, I haven't paid attention to my needs. I haven't thought about what I might need to be well, and I haven't asked anybody for help. And again, what this menstrual cycle tracking has done for me it's enabled me to think, okay, what do I need in autumn? What do I need in winter? And who do I ask for that? And how do I ask for it? And on the subject of sleep, there's a fantastic book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, and he was saying, and this plays into our work around incivility in both the veterinary and legal professions. Now you're doing this work, but basically they said that even if team members are well rested, if your manager shows up not well rested, lacking in sleep, that even if they're not being actively uncivil, the employees feel disengaged if the manager is lacking in sleep.
Wow.
I guess that, I mean, it may be that you're not being actively uncivil, but I suppose when you're tired, your entire persona, the way you carry yourself, the way you appear, the way you look, I think all of that can have a real impact, can't it?
We talk about non-verbal communication as well, and so sometimes it's not what you say, right? It's the rest. And that sort of perhaps facial leakage is also more of a problem in those times of the month where you don't really have to say anything. You just give a look and everybody knows that they're on thin ice. I'm really interested also doing the work, obviously, Amy, we've collaborated on civility before, and continue to do so. When we think about civility and menstruation, that's such an important part as well. Like when we look at the causes of incivility, I think that we could do better to understand that as well, and weave this understanding of where other people might be and meet them there, rather than just assuming they're a bad person. Actually, it's asking that question, the deeper question of why is this person behaving in the way they are today? And sometimes that might sound, I was about to say simply, and whether it's simply or not, be because they're in autumn and winter, and actually this is not the best day for a difficult conversation.
I was actually going to ask, Amy, and this might be very generalist. You mentioned before about autumn being kind of your time to write, and that's when you felt like you were kind of most driven to do that and most successful at doing that. Are there any kind of key I suppose attributes or key kind of, if you're looking at a cycle, is there any kind of key stereotypes, I suppose, to the seasons on what people tend to be strongest at, in spring, summer, autumn, winter?
Yeah, I think it probably is very person specific. I think there's the normal menstrual cycle is vastly wide ranging in how we experience it. So no two people will experience their menstrual cycle in the same way. I think, there is an element of the sort of introverted, extroverted kind of cycle, I suppose, that spring, summer tends to be the time when maybe you're out there interacting, wanting to be with groups that, I find presenting much easier when I'm in spring or summer. Because I feel like I've got that confidence, like I kind of want to be interacting with people. And then, the autumn, winter, I think is about sort of withdrawal and reflection and quieter times. And what I've noticed is if I don't pay attention to that, then I just fall off a cliff and I have no choice but to rest and do different work. But as I said, there is a way that once you know it, knowledge is power. So once you know that that's your cycle, I can show up and present in autumn. I can. But what I might need to do is I might need to get a really good night's sleep. I might need to eat a really hearty breakfast. That I remember back to nursing when I thought I was a hero because I could get up in the morning, get to work, which was a 50-minute commute, no breakfast. And the first time I had a wee was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I thought I was amazing, because I could just crack on. But actually, it's really not the right way to be. And I realised that quite early on and started encouraging other people to take rest breaks and have lunch breaks and things like that. But I didn't do it for myself. And so the power that I found from looking into my own menstrual cycle has been it's just that light bulb moment, like, you're on day 21, maybe you might want to take it easy.
I suppose that's the question, isn't it? Like, how do you like, you might be right, this is the perfect time to have a difficult conversation, but the person you're talking to is saying, no, I'm in autumn, this is not a good time. It's a bit like, how do you find the common ground?
I think it's about asking and inquiring, isn't it? So I think we rush in and we go, I've got some feedback for that person. I really need to give them the feedback. Do they want the feedback? Probably not. Are they interested in the feedback? Probably not. Can it wait? Maybe. So why not ask the person, I've got something that might be helpful to you. Would you like to hear it? They can say yes or no, or they can say, actually, I'm feeling a bit fragile today, so maybe we could bounce that conversation to another time, or they might prefer to have it written down or something like that instead. And I think it's just about that individual communication. But what I've noticed is that unless we slow down, we don't have the time to inquire. And so I guess what I'm advocating for is, let's slow down and have these conversations, because we will save time later because we haven't had an argument that we then have to repair.
Or you're not having to repeat yourself, because when you've said it the first time, it actually landed. They were ready to hear it. They were ready to take it on, rather than, it just going straight over their head, or, and because they weren't ready. They weren't in a position to hear what you were saying. So I think that's the other really important thing. I think it also goes back to being purposeful. I think it's like, embrace the pause, but be purposeful with it as well. Like, think about, I think we get carried away. It's like we're on this treadmill of life. Everything's so on demand. Everything's so fast paced that I think we forget that we actually do have more control. Like, but we have to take control. No one's going to give it to us. We have to take the pause. We have to take the control, and we have to be purposeful with it and go into it with intention. And I think sometimes it's quite easy to forget that.
As you were talking, Amy, I was just thinking about the fact that, we often talk about differences at work, sort of neurodiversity and things like that, and encourage people to ask how people would like feedback, what works for them. And I'm not suggesting on the first day of anybody's working that they launch into a conversation about communication and say, how would you like feedback? How would you? Well, I am suggesting that bit, but I'm not then suggesting you take it a step further and say, and tell me about your menstrual cycle and when would you like some feedback? But there's a part of me that thinks, should we be a little bit braver and say, if somebody comes to you and says, how would you like feedback? How can I best communicate with you? Rather than just thinking about the preferences of whether that's email or verbal, we should also sort of be brave enough to say, do you know what? Sometimes when you come to me and say that you have feedback, I might not be in the right place to receive that because of the season that I'm in. So I want you to understand that if that's something that I request, then there's sort of a validity behind it. I'm not kind of just brushing you off and saying, actually, I don't care. I'm actually making a valid request that's going to work best for us both in the long term.
What I was saying before about kind of period policy and things like that, I guess what I want to happen by talking about this is I want us to start it at the grassroots level, right? The organisation is probably not going to take this up, but as people in the workplace, we can be having these conversations. And the reason I think the metaphor is so powerful is because it is such a taboo subject. But if we can use the metaphor of the seasons, then we can start having those conversations. And now all of a sudden, I was using, autumn, and I was dancing around it. And then now I find myself saying premenstruum without even worrying about it. in the workplace and everywhere, and I'm talking to everybody about it. And, maybe I'm boring, that there is obviously, there might be a point where people glaze over. But actually, I think we need to be a little bit braver with our conversations. And, like you were saying, Helen, about communication, the way I like to be communicated with on any given day might be different. So if you are communicating with me, that is something that you need to pay attention to. And so there's not just my menstrual cycle, but I might be grieving. I might have had something really difficult happen to me at home. We talk about in the incivility work about that no bad people, just bad circumstances that have led them to be uncivil. And I think it's the same thing, that we just need to be more curious about people. And we're not going to be able to, like you said, do it in induction and write it all down, because it might be different tomorrow, and that's okay. But the only way we're going to be able to do that is by being a little bit slower and a little bit more deliberate, and being curious about where people are, and meeting people where they are with their communication.
I mean, I think it's a conversation, and you're right as well. The other word I wrote down as you were talking was about mirroring, and just mirroring that to kind of the future generations is so powerful. It's about, like, saying, it's giving permission to them basically, and to show them that it's okay in a way that potentially we didn't have. Like, we had that body form advert that was the opposite, and that's kind of what was being portrayed to us as the way to thrive. But actually, I think the narrative has now changed. So, Amy, that's been hugely empowering. And as I say, like, it feels like it's so self-indulgent, because now I feel like I've learned, and, I think I could really do with almost like tracking my cycle and kind of really working it out, and almost marking in my diary when I'm like, feel like it's spring, summer, autumn, winter, and just being really purposeful and intentional about it, and really giving it the space to think. So, Amy, we ask all of our guests to end with kind of your top 3 tips for thriving. They can be anything. They can be very personal. They can be professional. But we always ask for a final, as if you haven't given enough wisdom, a final 3 gems of wisdom.
Okay, so the first one, I think, is listen to your body. It's got a lot to tell you. And I think I was very up in my head, intellectualizing it all, and actually feel it, because it's there. It's got a lot to tell you. Slow down, and slow down in the face of everybody else being busy and speeding up. Do the opposite, which I appreciate takes real courage, especially if you're trying to progress in your workplace, or do better in your profession. It takes a lot of courage to slow down instead. And then can I finish with a lovely quote?
Please.
That'd be okay. From Catherine May's book Winter. She says, "When I started feeling the drag of winter, I began to treat myself like a favoured child, with kindness and love. I assumed my needs were reasonable, and that my feelings were signals of something important."
That was absolutely beautiful, and what a perfect way to end. So, wow, that was the most phenomenal discussion. I can't think of a more perfect conversation for International Women's Day. Helen, thank you so much to introducing us to Amy. I mean, like, absolutely phenomenal.
I know. I'm so proud of her, of Amy and I are very similar in like many ways, in our thirst for learning, our collection of letters after our name, that kind of thing of always wanting to improve. It's, for anybody, it's no small thing to embark on a master's, but to embark on such a journey of the unknown and to have arrived at such a powerful dissertation. It's immense, absolutely immense. And she's such a thought leader. And I'm so glad that also I think that this subject is so transferable to other professions. And it's something that everybody needs to hear about. And, that we were talking about the fact that we need to start this conversation earlier. We need to start this conversation and normalize it for our children, so that everybody feels that they can talk about it and understand and be have that empathy for one another, because it is that understanding that is lacking at the moment. And that, I think, comes from shame, right? Putting the tampon up your sleeve, or, can you just, for a minute, the times where you've dropped something like that, or something's fallen out of your bag at school, the shame, the absolute, like, wanting the world to stop, swallow you up, all of that kind of stuff. We've all been there, right? That's just...
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, like, she's so brave. I was really inspired by how brave she is in having the conversation. I'm like, what? Why is this? Why am I associating? Why does it take a brave person to have this conversation? It shouldn't require bravery. I mean, it's amazing that she is, but it shouldn't require bravery. We should all be having this conversation much, much earlier. And it does come down to performance. Like, this isn't a question about, it's not about being well. It's not some sort of soft question. This is directly related to our performance. Like 50% of the population will be affected by this. This is about how we perform. This is, using the tools that we have, our own personal selves, to perform at our best and to maximize that, make us most efficient. And we're not having this conversation, and we haven't been. So we've just so much potential that's been missed.
And I think, working smarter, that, obviously this whole podcast is based around human factors, increasing well-being, optimizing performance, all of those kind of things. And that's what we do. But it's it's really not rocket science, is it? But it's something that we just don't attend to. And I just sort of think this is a real way that we can get ahead. We can maximize those moments where we actually, as individuals, feel that we can go full steam ahead, but also respect the times where we want to go a little bit slower. We want to take that time to nurture, and perhaps, even taking that outside of the work context, how many times do we get asked to a social engagement, and then actually when it gets to it, we sort of think, oh, I'm so tired, but I better go because I've said I will go and I don't want to let anybody down. If we can plan and predict when those moments might be, or listen to our bodies and understand it a bit better, then maybe we can step back and say, do you know what, actually I don't want to let my friend out, but maybe I'll suggest a different date. Maybe a different date. Maybe they'll get maybe they'll get the best of me, the zingy kind of spring summer, if we just move it a few weeks, and start, just even have that conversation.
And I think it's about also bringing men in on the conversation too, because I think it feels like a conversation that, we're just bringing men into the conversation around menopause, really. And actually, I think this is another conversation that we need to bring them in, because this isn't our problem. It's not a female problem.
No,
it's, it is a performance. We're a whole performing together. And I think maybe it's about understanding as well. I think, it's something that men, we've got to give them permission not to relate to it, because they don't relate to it, and how do we bridge that gap, and how do we bring them on this journey as well, is really important, and a really important consideration.
And I think normalizing that conversation and talking about it, right? Just making it, my son will probably be furious for me for disclosing this, but we had a what you could describe as a hilarious moment at home, maybe a few years ago now, where he had, obviously from his lessons at school, from what he'd picked up around the house, from perhaps my negligence in not talking about it explicitly or openly, he had it in his mind that the first of the month was the first of the month, and every woman cycled, and that cycle started, or whatever, on the first of the month. It was only when I said, Dig, why would you think anything different if you hadn't explained?
Yeah.
But how terrifying would that be as a first thing? But secondly, I sort of thought that's the kind of, because of the way we set this up, But we exclude men from the conversation.
Yeah. It's nuts, because why should he think any differently?
Yeah, exactly. But I do think that we need to learn from things like that and just make the conversation more inclusive. And work hard to do that. I think, gosh, there's so many things we need to work hard on right now, but this is definitely up there, isn't it?
So yes, I leave feeling wiser and kind of refreshed, and with a new kind of feeling of We're an intention to be more purposeful, I think, and to be more aware.
And we did, we intentionally, I say that with a slight smile because it wasn't ultra intentional at the time, stopped the recording with Amy just after that beautiful quote that she gave us. But we did say goodbye to Amy and thank her. And just wanted to reiterate that sense of gratefulness.
Basically, listeners, I was driving the recording and it was remote and our broadcast producer was not present and I pressed stop by accident. And then we were so scared about pressing start again, we just left it.
Yeah.
If in doubt, run away. Incredibly, yeah. So there we go. One thing I won't be adding to my CV is the ability to record podcasts, but we are incredibly grateful for Amy for all of the work she's doing and for the bravery, even though we wish she didn't have to be brave, the bravery in bringing that conversation to the fore. So thank you very much, Amy. We will link the books that she mentioned in the show notes. But thank you so much, Amy, and happy International Women's Day, everybody.
Yeah, happy International Women's Day.
Just before we say goodbye, I'd like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to Flank, our sponsor for the How to Thrive podcast. Without their support, it would be much, much harder for us to share the wonderful learnings from our guests. So thank you so much, Flank. And if you'd like to find out more about how they can support your legal operations, please go to getflank.ai.